Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers. Today on this channel, we're going to talk about what is actually an incredibly depressing story, not just for the savage nature of the crime that we're talking about, but for the response of certain people, including one LeBron James. But before we get into this story, which is quite a serious story, we have a sponsor for today's video, and it's a long-term sponsor. It's Noble Gold, so I'm going to throw it over to them and then come back on the other side. Remember, supporting the sponsors helps support the channel. Over the years, I'm sure you guys have heard about a multitude of different investment products, whether that be individual stocks or traditional, allegedly safer, more reliable investments like mutual funds. Look at how my portfolio is doing investing in mutual funds, by the way. But with inflation running at 40-year highs at about 8.5%, you need something to hedge against the downturns of the market and against inflation, because that level of security is worth your weight in gold. This is why I'm a big fan of noblegoldinvestments.com. If you go over to them, they're now offering a Noble Gold IRA to help you secure and protect some of your assets with gold for retirement. And if you sign up and you start a qualifying account with them this month, you'll get a 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin as a gift, again with a qualifying IRA. To learn about all this, go over to noblegoldinvestments.com or call them at 877-646-5347. That's 877-646-5347, noblegoldinvestments.com. So the subject of today's story is a teenage boy called Ethan Liming out of Akron, Ohio. Now, Ethan was out and about with some of his friends, and they were messing around. And I just want to correct this notion that is out there in the public consciousness right now, due to the way that some of the articles are describing what he was doing. But it's described in the articles that Ethan was driving around with his friends, firing what they describe as a water gun at random passerbys, and this ultimately ended up leading to the altercation that resulted in the death of Ethan Liming. Now, to be clear, it's not exactly a super soaker or a regular water gun that was in play. I actually did some research, found out that this gun fires water beads, and I found a video on YouTube so you can see what this thing actually does, so you can understand why this is a bit more serious than a Nerf gun, but nowhere near as serious as even a paintball gun or an airsoft or anything like that. So we're going to play that clip so you can understand, because we're about full context in this scenario. And to be clear, Ethan and his friends did initially provoke the encounter that we're going to talk about today.
As far as marking this target goes, definitely doing the job. And so each one of those impacts leaves behind a slight amount of the coloration from the ammo, as well as, an obvious water impact. And part of that's because when I fire into something solid, this ammo is bouncy when being gently handled, but once it hits something solid, it just explodes. It's pretty cool. We're going to go ahead and move all the way into full auto here and just unload into this target and see what happens.
Now, there are a bunch of videos on YouTube where you can look up this toy, and it is classified as a toy because this is typically what's used in places where airsoft is very tightly regulated, and people describe this as maybe a slight stinging to a serious stinging, depending on the person getting hit with it. But the reason I'm making that clarification is because this clarification was not in the articles, and I want you to understand that them driving around in cars was just boys being boys, but they were also doing something that was really annoying and was causing actual pain to people that they were passing by, just firing upon. Again, 17-year-old kids, this is standard fare, and I just want you guys to understand that. Second, and this is incredibly important, a lot of people are talking about the suspects in this case and the fact that they are 3 black men. And by the way, they were actually arrested today at the time that I'm recording this video, and here are their faces. But I need to make it clear that even though the reason we're talking about this situation is because the external reaction would be different had the races been reversed between these 3 men and the person they ultimately ended up killing, it would be a national news story, but it was not racially motivated. Ethan was actually in a car with 4 total people, including himself. Ethan and another person were white, and the 2 other people were black, and 2 of those people in the car got into the initial altercation that ultimately ended up leading to this situation. So we're going to put all those out there out front so you guys can understand it, because what we're talking about is not necessarily a hate crime. In fact, this is very specifically not a hate crime. It's not an anti-white hate crime, but we're going to discuss the reaction to this and how the left would ignore all of the details that I'm giving to you and say it was in fact a hate crime if the races were reversed. So during the course of this evening, around 10:40 p.m., Ethan was driving around with his friends, and they came up across LeBron James Promise School. And if you haven't heard about this, this is supposedly LeBron James's school that's supposed to improve for people who get left back in Akron, Ohio. But in reality, it's just a school that he sponsors with the Akron public school system and paints murals of himself all over. You think there's enough images of LeBron James at this school? Do you think that maybe LeBron should have cut out maybe the third or fourth image of himself and maybe made Martin Luther King's image a little bit bigger, maybe showed some of these actual important historical figures in a better light? Obviously, this was an insane ego project for LeBron James, but again, just note that LeBron is heavily involved in promoting this school. He often retweets the things from the LeBron James Family Foundation, which is connected to this school, because supposedly he cares about what's going on at this school. Well, the night in question, after they fired upon some guys that were on a basketball court connected to the school, the guys got angry, and Ethan's friends ended up chasing these guys, but then they started running back from the guys that they were previously chasing, according to the reports, and Ethan stepped out of the vehicle to be like, hey, we're all horsing around, it's just a joke, no big deal, whatever. And at this point, two of these black males actually ended up attacking Ethan, and he ended up getting into a fight, as described by his friends. He was fighting for his life.
It's been 1 week of total anguish for the family of Ethan Liming.
What did he do to you that you deserve to kill him like this? I just can't wrap my head around why you did this to him.
Akron police say on the evening of June 2nd, officers responded to a reported fight outside of the I Promise school on West Market Street. Investigators tell us Ethan and a group of friends pulled up and fired gel beads from a splatter water bead blaster gun at a group playing basketball. A fight ensued, and police say Ethan was savagely beaten to death.
Now, Ethan, by the way, who wasn't expecting a fight in this situation, got out of the car because he thought they were all joking around and everything was cool. Ethan, who was not the person who was firing upon these people, because remember, the people chasing them around were the ones firing upon these people, was actually doing quite well in this fight, according to his friends. Even though it was 2 versus 1, Ethan was holding his own, but his friends did describe this portion as Ethan fighting for his life. But Ethan was an athlete at his high school. Here's some photos of that so you guys can understand, and he seemed to be holding his own at some point. However, as we've seen time and time again with situations like this, Ethan was ultimately sucker punched from behind, knocked out cold, and then these people decided that it would be a good idea because they got hit with some water beads to stomp him out, and he ultimately ended up losing his life. Now, the alleged attackers in this situation who have been arrested, now there were 4 total in their group, which were these 3 guys that physically jumped Ethan and stomped him out after he was already knocked out, one of them who sucker punched him, because the 2 that started the fight with him before he even knew it was actually a fight weren't enough to overwhelm this 17-year-old kid, are as follows. There's 20-year-old Deshaun Stafford Jr., 19-year-old Tyler Stafford, and 21-year-old Donovan Jones. So these are 3 legal adults in this situation who thought it was appropriate to attack somebody physically, sucker punch him, knock him out, and continue to beat him as he was on the ground because they got hit with some water beads by some kids horsing around, and the kid, when he got out of the car, didn't realize that this was going to be a fight for his life, so they thought that was a good opportunity to sucker punch him there, and then to sucker punch him from behind when he was doing too well against the 2 cowards that were initially making this into a bigger situation than it actually was. And also, there was a female that was reportedly with them, and the female didn't appear to be doing anything to reduce or calm the situation, but she has not been arrested, so we don't have any information, or I can't find any information on her as of right now. But again, this is just a thing that happens in the United States of America, but this thing actually ended up happening right outside LeBron James's Promise School, and because of the connection, you would think when there was an ongoing manhunt, because this crime occurred on June 2nd, and they were looking for these people for a while, the family was actually begging for some attention from the press in order to look into this so they could catch the killers of their 17-year-old son, LeBron James would release a statement. However, even though this would make sense, and as we're going to talk about a little bit later, LeBron and all these celebrities would jump on this story if you tweaked a few things with the races of the people involved, involved in this story, it turns out he didn't really have a lot of time for Ethan liming anybody in his hometown that is not of a certain race, and he released this very milquetoast statement. And we're going to go to the LeBron James Family Foundation statement because, again, they're the ones that are technically connected to this school, and then we're going to go over his quote tweet about this. Our community is everything to us. We were devastated to learn of the overnight incident that saw a life lost near our school. We are grieving with our community over another senseless act of violence. Our prom school campus is safe and secure, and we will continue to do everything we can to support our students, families, and the entire Akron community. And LeBron James quote tweeted this with, "Our condolences go out to the family who lost a loved one. May the heavens above watch over you during this tragedy. Pray for our community." And he gave a heart and a crown. That's it. That is the entirety of the statement from LeBron James and from his foundation, which, by the way, I would have counted something more substantial from his foundation. However, they ultimately ended up coming out and saying something tragic happened to who knows who, and who knows who did it. Don't worry about it. Our school campus, totally safe, though. Don't worry about our school. Our school is fine. And then LeBron James is like, our condolences, basically thoughts and prayers, which is something that he's criticized Republicans for sending out after shootings. And then he ultimately ends up doing the equivalent of that, because this case, of all the cases, even though it's tied to his school, even though it's in his hometown, doesn't really bother LeBron James in any way. And what bothers him is people talking about it because of the makeup of the people involved in this case. I mean, think about it. LeBron James has gotten on ridiculous Black Lives Matter narrative. Remember, LeBron James, seconds after it was reported that a police officer shot an unarmed woman who was in fact not unarmed, she actually was in the act of stabbing another woman, another black woman, not that LeBron James cares. He tweeted out his image, and he did so with a threat of this person, even though what he did in that situation was 100% justified. We made a video about it. We talked about it. You can find that linked in the iCard or in the description of this video. But this case, where it's a clear and obvious case of murder, it's right in his backyard, all the parameters would seem to fit. All of a sudden, LeBron James's voice eludes him. His duty to speak up about important issues doesn't really exist. Even though the family is begging for the attention, it doesn't seem to interest LeBron. It doesn't seem to interest anybody in the mainstream media. And that's really what the issue at hand is. They're not worried about lives. They're not worried about the brutality. They're not worried about the immorality of the actions. All these people are worried about, all these activists are worried about, all the national media is worried about, is whether or not they can gin up some kind of hysteria based on the racial makeup of these incidents. The real reason why we didn't hear about this story nationally, the real reason why LeBron James wasn't interested in commenting about this story, is because the people who killed Ethan Liming were 3 black men, and there was a black woman there who decided that she wasn't going to do anything to stop her friends or even try to warn them to not kill this person. They don't care about injustice, they don't care about crime, they don't care about any of that stuff. What they care about is putting out their narrative for who they consider to be within their tribe. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if Kim Kardashian in a few years would be trying to get all 3 of these victims of systemic racism out of jail because a white person was killed by them, therefore somehow the system was racist against them by trying to arrest them and try them for the crime that they actually committed. Every time I see a story like this, every time I see a case like this, after the tragedy sets in, after the anger because it's another senseless act of violence that people aren't interested in talking about or addressing, I end up thinking of Jasmine Barnes, because Jasmine Barnes is the perfect example of the phenomenon that we're talking about. For those of you who don't remember, and I've talked about it on this channel multiple different times, Jasmine Barnes was a 7-year-old girl who was murdered on New Year's Day at around 6 in the morning in her mother's car, and initially it was believed to be that a person of interest was in fact a white man. So people assumed that the shooter was a white man, they assumed that it was done for racist motives, and it was a national story. And during the course of this national story, Sean King was putting out information on people he thought might be vaguely connected to the crime, which ultimately ended up leading to that person, due to the harassment from Sean King, not just against him, but against his whole family, taking his own life. And then we ended up finding out that the killers of Jasmine Barnes were in fact 2 black males. And one of them was actually named Black, Eric Black Jr. And after this happened, after this occurred, after this was revealed, all of a sudden, all the national attention dissipated. All of a sudden, all the national attention was gone. It was just not an issue anymore. It became a local story. And if you do searches, you'll actually find when they made the arrest. That is the day that the coverage died in all the national press. It was like she didn't exist anymore. And then we ultimately ended up finding out that the mother of this girl had a connection to the person who was a drug dealer and she was a former drug user. And we found out that this was New Year's Day at around 5 to 6 in the morning, and she had dragged her kids out in a car and they weren't even fully dressed. So the idea that she just needed to get coffee that badly at this time of day didn't make any sense. The whole story was shaky, and I'd love to give you the factual basis of what actually went down, but unfortunately, I rely on the reporting from the media, who have decided that Jasmine Barnes' case is no longer interesting in any possible way.
Oh, so you said that it was a white guy. What happened?
The reason the Jasmine Barnes case is so important is because after you see the media cover something wire to wire when they believe there to be a white suspect, after you see NBA players donating their game day check, after you see all of these activists do their Twitter campaigns, justice for Jasmine Barnes, and then we ultimately end up finding out that the suspects are two black people, and simultaneously, snap of the fingers, all of that disappears. No more talk about it from NBA players. No more talk about it from everyone. It really opens your eyes. So if you're wondering why Ethan Liming isn't getting national attention, if you're wondering why the only reason you're hearing about this story is the connection to the LeBron James school, it's because of the races of the people involved. Black people beat a white person to death for no justifiable reason, viciously. Not a news story. That's a local news. Don't worry about it. The friends, their reports, the parents' grief, all that doesn't matter. But if you get into a situation, a rare situation, even when you just have a hint of the situation, when it's a white person killing a black person, that's immediately national news. It's too good to fact check, and they have to make an example of it and link it back to all the historic cases in time and blah, blah, blah. And as soon as that doesn't work out, again, you just abandon the story, move along, pretend like it never happened, or repeat the myth over and over again until it becomes true in the public consciousness. That's what we're dealing with in this country right now. That's why whenever you see one of these viral cases that the left is pushing, you need to remember in the back of your head, there's always 17 times more cases that are the other way that the left isn't even interested in. In fact, the cases that they're pushing of a white person killing a black person are so rare that a bunch of them turn out to not even be the case once the investigation goes forward. They have to manufacture, reinterpret, pretend like forensic evidence doesn't exist, pretend video evidence doesn't exist, pretend that the police are photoshopping things in order to force their narrative, because what they're talking about is the ultimate man bites dog situation. They don't want to talk about the far more likely outcome, which is a dog biting a man. So shame on LeBron, shame on the NBA players, shame on the national media for not caring during an active manhunt, shame on the people who were calling the parents racist for identifying the descriptors of the suspects while they were at large, because you're scumbags as well. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, you show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social media. You can support me via the support links of the description box. This has been me talking about the Ethan Liming case and the lack of interest from all these key people who should be interested if we were to take them at their word about injustice. Till next time.